we have processed foods, and then we have ooga booga processed foods. Okay, there's processed foods that are hyper palatable, that have a lot of garbage in them, that have terrible seasonings and have terrible, just things that we shouldn't be consuming a lot of. And then there's processed foods that are just sort of benign. They're just processed. Like nuts, for example, are technically processed, right? So not all processed food is bad. In fact, some processed food can lower your blood sugar. And that's what we're going to talk about today. The first food that could lower your blood sugar that's technically a processed food is going to be flaxseed-based crackers. There are crackers out there where the predominant flour or the predominant constituent of the actual cracker is a flaxseed. There's one brand in particular, no fiduciary obligation to this brand whatsoever, called Flackers, where it's literally just flax seeds and some rosemary and things like that, put it into a cracker. The reason I mention this is because there was a study published in the European Journal of Nutrition that looked at literal flax muffins. And these muffins probably had sugar and all kinds of stuff, right? So they had subjects eat 3 flax muffins in the morning or 3 flax muffins spaced evenly throughout the day, and then of course a control group. They found that when the flax muffins were given throughout the course of the day, blood sugar levels were maintained and stayed nice and even throughout the course of the day. As a matter of fact, their 24-hour plasma glucose was significantly lower than the morning group and of course the control group. So even when adding sugar and other flours, when flax seeds were in the equation with these muffins, the overall net result was positive. So if you start going further down and you find processed crackers or foods that have a high amount of flax seeds, I guess like the first, second, or third ingredient, you actually have a very net positive impact on your blood sugar. What I would recommend is that you consume these things with a meal because they're only going to slow down the glycemic impact of whatever it is that you're eating. I'm a big fan of not having snacks as snacks. I'm a big fan of consolidating meals as much as you can so you're not just constantly eating, grazing throughout the day. After today's video, I popped a link down below for LMNT electrolytes, element electrolytes. So no matter what kind of dietary protocol you're doing or if you're exercising, obviously electrolytes are important, but down below, you can get a free variety pack of LMNT electrolytes with any purchase. So it's an exclusive deal for those that watch my videos. So they have all kinds of flavors. They have citrus salt, which is kind of my go-to. They've got mango chili, lemon habanero, plain unflavored. It's awesome. They've got chocolate salt that you can mix with hot water so you can get your electrolytes, your sodium, your potassium, your magnesium in a delicious form. So that link is down below. It's drinklmnt.com/Thomas, drinklmnt.com/Thomas. Check them out after this video, that link down below. Trust me, it's a delicious way to fight off cravings and to have something to sip on that's 0 calorie or very minimal calorie throughout the course of the day. This next one is a weird one. Maybe you've looked on a label and you've seen like tapioca starch before. The higher that this tapioca starch is on the ingredient list, the better the impact on the blood sugar. You know what's wild is tapioca came onto the scene because we were trying to sort of combat a lot of the glutens, and we were trying to combat some of the other like flours and stuff. The problem is tapioca by its own very nature is very high glycemic. It's a high GI carb. So yes, we can lower the carb impact. Yes, we can be gluten-free, but we actually increase the GI, which makes tapioca sound bad. However, that's not the case. There was a study published in Nutritional Sciences that had subjects consume on 5 separate occasions for 5 days, either varying amounts of tapioca starch or 50 grams of glucose. What they found is that in the tapioca groups, it actually lowered their blood sugar in a dose-dependent fashion. The more tapioca, the lower the blood sugar. But even better than that, it reduced their serum insulin levels. So the body was able to bring glucose down and didn't have to produce as much insulin. This, my friends, is how you work towards improving insulin resistance. This isn't just lowering glucose. This has a potentially powerful effect there. That's very fascinating. And what researchers are speculating is it has something more to do with the resistant starch components of tapioca. So even though tapioca is relatively high glycemic, because there's starches in it that the body just can't break down properly, it brings down the net impression that it has on your body. So basically, it reduces the glucose from other foods. So definitely an interesting processed food. This next one is one that's quite hippy-dippy. And what I mean by that is, if you saw someone out on the street eating a bag of Chickpea Snacks, you'd probably think they're a hippy-dippy person. Well, I quite like Chickpea Snacks. Now, maybe I'm hippy-dippy now and then, but anyway, there's some research behind it that's fascinating. There's a study in food science and technology that had participants consume equal amounts of carbohydrates and equal amounts of calories, of energy, from chickpea snacks or bread. So the carb content and the calorie content were the same in both groups. Bread, chickpea snacks. There was a 29 to 36% reduction in blood sugar levels in the chickpea group compared to the other group. But get this, there was an 83 to 98% reduction in how much they wanted to eat at their next meal in the chickpea group. Now, what we liken this to is the unique ratio of fiber and protein with chickpea snacks. You've got a great ratio, high protein and high fiber. So yes, you're gonna modulate glucose, but the satiety score of these suckers is through the roof. So yes, are they processed? Absolutely. Are they dried? Do they often have seasoning added to them? Yes. But in the world of snacks and processed foods, they're probably one of the best that you could consume. This next one is macadamia nuts. Macadamia nuts are technically very processed. Doesn't mean they're bad. I think it's living pretty close to the earth if you ask me. Now, one could say, well, it's the fiber content, but the fiber content's not astronomical in macadamia nuts. So we look at a study that was published in Lipids, and it was fascinating because this study gave subjects 15% of their energy needs from macadamia nuts. So that's a lot of macadamia nuts, but still 15% of your total calories from macadamia nuts. They found that this reduced their inflammation, their leukotrienes, their LTB4, and it reduced markers of oxidative stress, not a little bit, but a lot. Now, what does this have to do with glucose? Well, especially in someone that's insulin resistant or potentially diabetic, when you modulate oxidative stress and inflammation, you make it so that insulin can send a better signal and its receptor can recognize that signal better because there's less interference. So this is a huge, huge driver of being able to bring glucose down short and long term. Not to mention macadamia nuts also have high amounts of omega-7s, which are a unique type of monounsaturated fat that directly impacts pancreatic beta cells based upon some rodent model studies and a lot of newer studies coming out. Fascinating, fascinating stuff. Next up is seaweed snacks. Very much so a processed food. You take seaweed, you dry it, you put seasoning on it. That is processing to its very core. What's interesting about seaweed? Well, sure, there's some fiber in seaweed, but the reality is the amount of seaweed you're actually going to eat probably isn't netting you a ton of fiber. But the fiber that is in it is a beta-glucan, so it's very, very interesting and powerful when it comes down to the effect, but that's still not what we're going for here. Seaweed has a unique ability to inhibit alpha amylase and inhibit alpha glucosidase. These are two enzymes that are critical for breaking down polysaccharides and disaccharides into the individual monosaccharides that spike our glucose. So when you inhibit these enzymes, you slow down how much of a spike you can have. So seaweed is one of these snacks that you want to have with a high glycemic food, which is interesting because guess where we'd find nori and seaweed? Along with white rice a lot of times. Do you think maybe the Japanese have it right? Do you think maybe these cultures actually just inherently knew what to do? Like sushi, for example, the rice, if it wasn't for the sugar added into the rice, sushi would be a pretty reasonable meal. You have cooled rice that is a resistant starch because it's been cooled. You have a high amount of protein. And then a lot of times you have nori, which has the alpha amylase and alpha glucosidase inhibition effect. So heck yeah, add the nori. You know what I used to do is I used to make my own sushi, whether it was with chicken or fish or whatever. I would make literally chicken sushi because I loved nori and I loved rice intermittently. I wouldn't eat it all the time, but it's a fun hack. So add nori to those higher glycemic carbs. You're gonna love to hear this one. Peanut butter. Look it, peanuts are a legume. Peanuts might be inflammatory, might not be something you want to eat all the time. But what I am getting at with this is there was an interesting paper that looked specifically at peanut butter, although I think this applies to almost all nut butters. But it's relieving to hear it done with peanut butter because some people just can't get rid of this stuff. But realize that peanut butter is very caloric and it may not be good for your waistline, but it could be good for your glucose. So this paper was published in the British Journal of Nutrition, took a look at whole peanuts versus peanut butter in conjunction with 75 grams of carbs. What they found is that the reduction in blood sugar was tremendously higher in the peanut butter group compared to the whole peanuts. They also saw there was a larger increase in what is called peptide YY, a larger increase in GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1, and a significant increase in CCK, cholecystokinin. These are gut incretins, and they are released and they make us satiated. Okay, so like glucagon-like peptide 1 is what you'd find in semaglutide. Okay, that's like the popular weight loss compound right now. Now, with that, it's interesting to see, like the researchers wonder, why would this, you would think peanuts would actually slow digestion of carbohydrates down more. But what's happening is it's the bioavailability of the lipids when it's pulverized into a butter like this. So although it may not be the best from a caloric standpoint, it is interesting because if you were to eat a bunch of peanuts, you'd have to masticate them like crazy in your mouth to turn it into a butter. Most of us just aren't doing that. So you're getting less surface area and less overall access to the lipids. When you poop out peanuts after eating them, you might see it in ground up form, right? But if you eat smooth peanut butter, you're not recognizing that in your poop. I know that's graphic, but the point is that those fats are still balled up in those chunks of peanuts that you chewed. So you're not getting the bioavailability of those lipids interfering with glucose. So don't eat a ton of it, but it might work. This next one is going to make enemies. People are probably going to clip a chunk of this video out and say that I'm crazy. I'm talking about specific use case of dried fruits. What the heck? Isn't that like the most concentrated sugar in the world? Yes, it is. What we need to look at is dried fruits really depend on the type of dried fruit that you consume as far as health benefits concerned. If you were to just go out and consume like raisins without anything else, you'd have a big spike in glucose. I can guarantee that. But what we're starting to see is that if you opt for fruits that are higher fructose, so maybe dried berries, dried strawberries, dried raspberries, perhaps prunes, okay, even apricots to a certain degree, higher fructose dried berries could actually be beneficial. Because what happens is if you combine those with a starch, the fructose will offset and sort of displace the glucose. Because you only have so many transporters. Even though they take different transporters, you're going to offset that a little bit. Fructose does not spike insulin. The big problem is it's very easy to overdo fructose. We can only handle so much in a given day. So if you had a big handful of dried fruit, it'd be easy to start getting like 50 grams of fructose, which might start being too much. So I'm talking responsible use case of like 1 or 2 prunes or a couple of dried apricots along with another carbohydrate to help negate and displace the glucose. Quite an interesting find. Now this last one is still a processed food, but it's one we wouldn't have thought. Tomato sauce. And tomato sauce is very processed, but is also exceptionally beneficial for people that are more insulin resistant or more diabetic. In almost like the more severe cases, the better it works. And there's a large meta-analysis that looked at this. It was published in the journal Nutrients, and it took a look at 11 studies, meta-analysis of all of these, okay? And it found that the more that tomato sauce and lycopene were in the diet, the lower the glucose levels. The 2 studies that took a look at diabetics specifically had the most profound effect from lycopene. Lycopene is a massive, massive free radical scavenger. So what that means is that when it scavenges free radicals, it is helping our insulin do its job better and helping this overall function, which explains why in people that are more severe cases, it worked better because the levels of oxidative stress and the levels of inflammation in people that are dealing with more advanced insulin resistance or diabetes is going to be higher. And if lycopene has the potential to offset that, you're in a great spot. That's a really good thing to choose for. So even though it's not a snack, and it's not your typical processed food, adding tomato sauce might be a huge game changer for you. So as always, keep it locked in here on my channel. I'll see you tomorrow.